The Shibuya Incident Arc, the climax of the new gen sensation that is Jujutsu Kaisen, and one that is currently being put on display for the masses through a masterful adaptation by none other than MAPPA. With a mixture of masterpieces and character arcs, enough incredible hype-filled fights that they end up having to compete with each other for Fight of the Year, and a sense of a chaotic plot that is stitched together perfectly by what can only be described as tragic luck. The battle between good and evil and all that in between featured the Jujutsu sorcerers placing their lives on the line. Or at least some of them, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Yeah, I'm going to pass until the very end, Kusakabe and Mei Mei. All in order to prevent the curses from fulfilling their dreams. This is an arc that will certainly go down in the history books, and with that, so will the performances we got from some of our fan favorites. I mean, there were undeniably feats and actions from some characters that definitely stood out from the others. Unstoppable runs of combat that allowed characters to directly impact their side's chance of winning and still look gas while doing it. Which character simply achieved the most in such a chaotic situation? In this one-of-a-kind manga spoiler-free video, we're going to be analyzing each of these individual performances in hopes of crowning the MVP, or the most valuable player of the Shibuya incident, or should I say, most valuable sorcerer. Anyway, before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Jujutsu Kaisen content, ending 2023 off on a high, and most importantly, make sure to comment down below who's your personal pick for MVP, because we're about to analyze your favorite character in 4K. Now, before I start my deep dive into the roles each character played, I think it's important to define my criteria or definition for this MVP award. Now, typically or rather ideally in professional sports, the MVP award is given to the best player in that sports league. Again, ideally. But even then, in this scenario, it's hard to put an exact print on who was the best character throughout the entire conflict, seeing as we had different sides with different goals and different feats and performances to achieve those goals. So to establish a criteria we can then apply to each character, we're going to first divide the selection between one for the Jujutsu sorcerers and one for the cursed spirits. But for what actually determines if one's performance was MVP caliber or not? Well, according to me, something like an MVP is based on the measure of impact one's character's individual success has on the overall team's or ally success, as in how important is your performance to the overall side winning. And with that, being the strongest or fighting the strongest doesn't always necessarily make you an MVP, but it for sure as hell makes you a contender. To draw it out, let's imagine if Kenjaku finally stood on business and took on Satoru Gojo, the strongest sorcerer alive one-on-one, and somehow won and sealed him. But when the grade 1s and the rest of Gojo's allies came to rescue him, and it was Jogo who took them all out, something he could have easily done, then in that specific scenario, Jogo would be gifted the MVP award, making him the most valuable curse. And on that note, a big factor in my reasoning will be in relation to how a character performs against or with either grade 1 sorcerers or the special grades in the disaster curses. As it was solidified time and time again throughout and even before the Shibuya arc, the grade 1s in Nanami, Mei Mei, Naobito, Kusakabe, and even Todo, the golden standards of Jujutsu Society, were meant to be the focal point in the sorcerer offense against these special grade curses, even though that didn't quite pan out exactly in the actual battle. And on the other side, the disaster curses were simply the pillars for the side of evil, as besides them they really only had the assistance of Chozo, who kinda quit and joined the other side midway through, as well as Kenjaku, or sorry, Fate Ghetto, trying to make this one of the few spoiler-free videos I ever make, and his background lackeys. Anyway, anything involving those two elite groups of characters will get you some points in my book. But with all the nuances out of the way, into some of the carry jobs and just playing out dead weights. Starting off with the more lackluster performances on the sorcerer side, we have Takumo Ino, a grade 2 sorcerer assigned to Nanami's group, and was seeking recommendation from the grade 1 to then attain the rank of a semi-grade 1. Now I do love me some Takumo, but bro went out sad. He was meant to coordinate with Yuji and Megumi to take one of the veils surrounding Shibuya that was preventing sorcerers from entering, and he did do his part in assisting with that when he picked up the fights against the curse user Granny Ogami and her grandson. But then he proceeded to draw the worst card possible maybe out of anyone in Shibuya with an encounter with Yuji Fushiguro, the ghost of the Zennin clan. Kinda made a banger on him recently, make sure to go check that out. But yeah, Takumo was knocked out of the game, like his health bar was gone after the first punch, like bro became deceased after his first fight. And let's say that we give him the benefit of the doubt and place him in literally any other matchup besides the physical monster that is Toji. He loses in any encounter with the disaster curses, gets his guts thrown out of him by Chozo, maybe takes out a few transfigured humans or stands off with Ghetto's lackeys, both of which would be of little to no importance. The best possible matchup I could see for him is with the grasshopper curse that Yuji faced, and even then, bro should be able to take it down, I mean, right? So yeah, at best he's a veil raiser. Nothing more, nothing less. But an even more disappointing performance belongs to Nobara Kugisaki. Can't believe I'm getting into this one this early. Hey, I just want to come out and say I am not a Nobara hater or misogynist, but it is time to get into one, if not the biggest disappointment in Jujutsu Kaisen. Or at least that is what Nobara will turn out to be if Gege doesn't cook up a triumphant return for her in the manga, especially when seeing the current state of affairs. But again, I digress with the spoilers, because without a return, we are forced to look at her action feats throughout the tragic night, which I can't even call lackluster because they were downright embarrassing. Now yes, Nobara did pop off against a Mahito clone with improved curse energy usage and amazing battle IQ, and got her participation credit / I'm still a member of the main trio moment. And not only did she help temporarily revive a broken Yuji, thus allowing him to put some damage on Mahito, but we later find out that the damage from a resonance attack on Mahito was stacked onto the final Black Flash that Yuji delivered in their final fight, and thus contributed to Mahito's eventual downfall, as it took a decent chunk out of his HP bar. Despite all that, there was an easy argument to be made how only rolling the entire counter was to serve as a plot device for Yuji's character arc, which evolved him further falling to despair at the sight of her quote-unquote death. Actually, it's not an argument, that's what actually happened. So with her death offsetting any sort of impact she had on the ensuing battles, we still have to factor her earlier fight, which no one wants to seem to talk about. She got absolutely dismantled by the biggest leech in the series, a curse user named Haruta Shigemo, a guy who at this point literally jumps weak people from behind, has no sort of will to engage in a real fight, and would rather be assigned to some meaningless tasks than do anything of importance. This twig of a man managed to bring Nobara, someone who was recommended to be promoted to grade 1, to her knees. And her loss wasn't even essential to the plot, she simply got caught off guard and even then had a bad strategy going in. Like, she recognized Karuta as a cursed tool user, probably fought in the mid to long range, and wasn't a good short range fighter, thus prompting her to take away his weapon and close in. But she wasn't even a good close range fighter. At what point in the series did she ever fight in the close range? Overall, she left herself and assistant manager Karunita vulnerable and had to be saved by Nanami. And that pretty much wraps up her involvement. As I said, disappointing. Now, I'm definitely encouraging the misogynist allegations with this next pick, but yes, we are critiquing female characters back to back. It's possible. And I actually really like this one, or at least her later variant and arc in the story. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and look at Maki Zennin, and this ought to be a quick one. She accompanied Naobito Zennin and was later joined by Nanami as they teamed up against the disaster curse spirit and Dagon. She then played a minor role in the initial jumping, which Nanami and Naobito could have definitely handled without her, but when it comes to her performance, if that's what you want to call it within his domain expansion, I bet she was a punching bag. Dagon clearly states he was storing 70% of his power to Naobito and 30% to Nanami, with no regard for Maki other than the occasional punch or kick. I will say she did well to survive by blocking that punch or kick and put up a decent fight with Naobito after the guaranteed hit effect had been shut off by Megumi, but they would have died soon anyway with or without her there, and she just ended up getting her HP bar drained instantly when Joko burned her. But fortunately, that wraps up the more minor contributions for this arc. Now moving on to some actual noteworthy moments that put these characters above the participation credit. We have the Kyoto Jujutsu High kids barring a Todo and including a Koichi aka Makamaru. Now I won't be including Koichi's hell of an opener Big Mac fight with Mahito in his feats for the arc, seeing as he ultimately took the L and did nothing to progress his goal of revealing the curse's plan to the sorcerers. And there's an argument to be made he further helped progress Mahito's evolution as a horrific threat in combat, but he did make up for it by living on as an audio and visual interface that helped facilitate the early plans and actions of the sorcerers, and frankly without him they would have been a while before they learned of Gojo's healing, which prompted them to take the actions they did. He single-handedly sparked the beginning of the sorcerer's attempt to thwart the curse's plan. And for the other Kyoto kids barring Todo, well, they didn't make their appearance until the very end due to Mekamaru manipulating the records, so they will be on a mission far from Shibuya when it occurred. This includes Noritoshi, Nishima, Miwa, and Mai, and funny enough his own teacher Yutahime, as he concluded their chances of surviving or having an impact on such a high stakes battle to be low. But they did manage to arrive just in time to pressure Fate Ghetto, obviously to no avail. I mean, they proved Mekamaru right 100%, but I will give them props for a coordinated attack on the strongest round at the time, and the fact that none of them died in the process is a W in their books. But wait, the only reason they didn't all turn to rubble after Fate Ghetto's maximum Uzumaki that created a massive crater in the ground was because they were saved by Mr. Yeah, I'm gonna pass until the very end Kusakabe and his subordinate in Panda, who despite their willingness to not contribute to appear in any early battles, I find myself thinking very highly of this strangely comedic duo, because in reality they're just like me and a whole lot of people watching this video. Atsuya Kusakabe, who was a grade 1, the only sorcerer of the ring to reach that curse technique, and also somebody whose skill was acknowledged by Fate Geto on his arrival into the battle, after he managed to defend against the maximum Uzumaki and save the Kyoto kids. While he, along with those of his rank, were meant to be part of the premier sorcerer offense against the curses, bro decided to be realistic. Yes, he is someone with a ton of skill for not having a curse technique, and probably will send an army of transfigured humans to the afterlife, takes and likely defeats any grade 1 curse, and might have even given Chozo a run for his money or at least a good fight. But once he sensed that special grade curse energy, he calmly concluded, yeah, I'm not built for this. Which allowed him to save both his and Panda's lives, because any matchup other than what I mentioned would have killed them. And through his lack of participation early on in the incident, it allowed him to stay alive long enough to save the Kyoto kids and Yuji. And I'm sure he eventually found some other civilians to save from the transfigured humans when he was wandering around. He was completely realistic about his role and made the right decision, and I genuinely applaud him for that. Same with Panda, although Kusakabe started to trick him into his role. Anyway, props to them. Mei Mei defeated the special grade curse, which served as her big moment in the arc and cleared her path towards Fate Geto and possibly rescuing Gojo. She had the main antagonist and mastermind of all this in front of her and logged out of the game. Like, following this face to face, the next time we see her, she's in Malaysia at a 5-star hotel in bed with her little brother in a scene I'm not even going to begin to talk about, and the Shibuya conflict was still going on. We later find out it was through Yu's teleportation curse technique she was able to make this escape, grade 1 sorcerer, a pretty strong one at that, and she went AFK in the biggest battle the sorcerers had faced. Even if she couldn't face Fate Geto and had to run, maybe just spam release a bunch of special grades, who's to say she couldn't have helped Yuji against Chozo and they would have won, or helped Yuji against Mahito, or maybe just even regroup with a Kusakabe and a Todo. A grade 1 trio that could have definitely put up a good fight with a Fate Geto. I mean, she's a whole adult and we have teenagers out here fighting special grades while she's taking vacation. I'm giving her the nod because she did defeat the special grade curse and allowed for Yuji to move forward, but damn. I guess we also shouldn't have placed stocks in someone who, now thinking about it, probably left Shibuya because she found out she wasn't getting paid for all the overtime. The last two characters that definitely contributed but not any of the MVP candidates would be two grade 1 sorcerers in Mei Mei and Naobito Zennin. Two characters who were meant to be the forefront in the battle with the curses. Where were they? I mean, I know Naobito as the head of the Zennin clan could care less about saving Gojo because the downfall of the Gojo clan benefits him. But in the case of Mei Mei, or as I now call her, Malaysia Mei, we have to talk about that masterclass disappearing act. Mei Mei, equipped with her curse tool of her brother in Yu and young sorcerer Yuji Itadori, after hearing of Gojo's healing, moved in to take out the transfigured humans and clear Itadori's path into taking out the veils and rescuing Gojo. With this, she countered what we can safely assume to be a grade 1 curse user and demolished them, and went on to face a special grade curse in the smallpox deity, both of which were released by Fate Geto in an attempt to slow her down or actually just entertain himself. I don't really know exactly what his intent was in doing that, strictly because of what followed that fight. Now, in Naobito's case, it's a little more difficult to gauge his performance in the arc, because when looking at it, he was definitely the strongest sorcerer that was present outside of Gojo and maybe Todo. He was the fastest sorcerer behind Gojo going into the event, and was even shown to move faster than the strongest disaster curse spirit at the time in Jogo, even after losing one of his arms. And he still was giving dagger on the hands throughout their fight. Naobito could have very well been a pivotal piece in literally any other matchup that didn't involve a domain expansion, which 3 out of the 4 disaster curse spirits can use. Yeah, even with the anti-domain counter and falling blossom emotion, Naobito along with Nanami and Maki were screwed before Megumi showed up. And then coupled that with Toji carrying them to victory against Dagon, and Naobito getting outclassed by Jogo. Yeah, his contribution kinda looks small in retrospective, which is tough considering with all that speed and decent power, he would have shown out and destroyed a Hanami or Chozo if they clashed. But if a curse could manage a domain expansion, he was screwed, and even then the other disaster curses were simply stronger. All in all, here are our premier gold standard grade 1s in Mei Mei and Naobito. Please retire! Speaking of, next on the list is none other than the strongest sorcerer alive in Satoru Gojo. And his contribution is also hard to gauge, as while he did take out one of the 4 disaster curses of Hanami, had the other disaster curses shaking in fear, and through an absolutely impossible gamble somehow saved the majority of the civilians in his vicinity through an epic, one-of-a-kind GOAT status 0.2 seconds domain expansion. But his appearance is kind of the whole reason anything transpired, so all of that equals out and prevents him from securing that MVP award bro would have been getting in any other scenario. Starting off this upper echelon of contribution, we have Kento Nanami, someone I will consistently praise as the true golden standard of a Jujutsu sorcerer. Someone who always understood the assignment and performed accordingly no matter what. Nanami was truly one of the only characters in Shibuya that did all they could given how chaotic the developments were. Rest in peace to one of the goats of the Chads, but moving on from glazing him and onto his actual contributions I gave him this candidacy. Well, from the jump after the learning of Gojo's sealing, he assigned the task of taking on the veils to his underlings in Takumo, Yuji, Megumi, something he was assured they were capable of, and they did exactly that. While he sought out the assistant managers who were laying low around the perimeter of the area and were facilitating communication between the sorcerers. And when he found most of them to be murdered, he saved the life of a dying Ijichi as he dropped him off with Shokuieri, Tokyo High's doctor who could heal people with reverse curse technique. He then went on to rescue Nobara and Aratanita when he confronted Haruta, the guy who was murdering the assistant managers, and gave him a generation beatdown his kids and grandkids would feel. I'm also gonna give him credit for giving the best advice ever in the series: if you're not at my level being grade 1, stay out of Shibuya. Hey, Nobara would have still been alive if she listened to those words. He then linked up with Naobito in an attempt to create a cohesive offensive plan against the curses, while also informing the Zennins of Gojo's sealing. Now, unfortunately, like Nobito, he did fall prey to the domain expansion of Dagon, but to be fair, Nanami has absolutely no anti-domain counter, something we clearly see in his duel fight with Mahito, and probably wouldn't have done better in any situation involving another curse in their domain expansion. But still, he did his best given the circumstances and survived the domain's death swarm long enough for Megumi to come rescue them with his domain expansion, and then proceeded to protect Megumi while Naobito and Maki took the offense. Toji would have never had the opportunity to cause havoc in the domain with killing Dagon if Nanami didn't protect Megumi from the giant ocean Shikigami long enough for the hole in the domain to open. Thus, I'm giving credit to Nanami as one of the reasons they survived that encounter. And while he did get burned to a crisp by Jogo right after, he then proceeded left without an arm and an eye to take on a horde of transfigured humans with all the energy he still had left. Again, doing the best he could despite the circumstances, until of course he met his tragic end to Mahito. Kento Nanami did an amazing job with what he was given, which was an absolutely chaotic event with special grade curses literally popping out of the blue for him. He's the only one besides Gojo who encountered 3 or more special grade curses, and he managed to live through 2 of those encounters and assisted in taking down one of them in Dagon. Nothing more we can ask from the golden standard of Jujutsu society. And with that, we have the last 2 MVP candidates, which happen to be the protagonists and the antagonists of the series in Yuji and Megumi, one of which will be crowned the MVP for the sorcerers, with the other clutching 3rd place behind Nanami's solid 2nd place. Now in Yuji's case, bro is kinda all over the place due to, you guessed it, Sukuna's rampage. And you can make the case that wasn't Yuji's fault because, well, it wasn't, at least not intentionally, and we'll talk about that soon. But first, what Yuji contributed to the quickly developing disaster. Under Mei Mei's guidance, he took out a veil after defeating the grade 2 grasshopper curse. And then later under Nanami's guidance, who he later linked up with, he took out his 2nd veil in a duel victory with Megumi over curse user Jiro Awasaka, making him the only sorcerer of the event to have a role in taking out 2 veils. He also threw Mekamo's guidance alerted Nanami of Gojo's sealing and probably everyone else in a couple of miles radius, with his quick thinking to announce it on top of a building as comms are down. And somewhere in between all this, he took out a couple of transfigured humans, thus saving some civilians. Yuji, the 1st year student, so far was on a roll, or well, until he finally met one of his biggest ops in Chozo. Big brother gave little brother the work. Now while this fight was a close one, but wait, it actually wasn't close? I know the anime makes it seem that type of way, but I'll explain. Yuji, when faced with Chozo's versatility and his relentless blood manipulation, was forced to remove the curse technique out of the equation in a bathroom filled with water. A plan he didn't even think of himself, and if he had stayed in the open, bro would have just become deceased a whole lot quicker. He couldn't handle all the smoke, bro was at a loss. It was in the bathroom we saw the animators go off and give you a strong contender for fight of the year, but don't let that fool you into forgetting, the end result was Yuji losing to a nerfed Chozo. This man Yuji was deceased, which gave way to Geto's daughters and Jogo to shove an overall amount in 12 of Sukuna's fingers down his throat, thus temporarily reviving the King of Curses. And what transpired next is what truly gave Shibuya its incident classification. An entire city and all of its inhabitants reduced to rubble on the whim of an 1,000-year-old sorcerer in the body of a 15-year-old. Now, I don't want to place the masterpiece of that tragedy squarely on the fact that Yuji initially lost to Chozo, because from the start, Yuji had already been marked as a target by Jogo, who would have gotten those fingers down Yuji's throat regardless if he was incapacitated or not when they met. Well, pause. Even then, Jogo would have been able to do the same to literally anybody in Shibuya that wasn't Sukuna, Toji, or Fake Geto, which yes, does include all of the Jujutsu sorcerers present, which prompts me to not fully dock Yuji's loss resulting in Sukuna's rampage as a negative in his role in the arc, because that then resulted in Sukuna killing Jogo, a huge positive for the sorcerers, especially when seeing how Jogo could have gone on to kill any of the sorcerers at will, which is evident from when he packed up 2 grade 1s in the matter of seconds, and while yes they were injured, they were still shaking in disbelief at the amount of cursed energy and power he was emitting with his presence. Put some respect on Joe Goat. But I will admit that Sukuna's actions were still largely a net negative for the sorcerers at the end of the day due to the absolute massacre of civilians in the radius of his domain expansion that we later find out managed to take out one of Togo's Inomaki's arms, and was a huge reason that Shibuya had the fallout it did. Now, I will then say I feel Yuji did make up for his inadvertent role in that tragedy, with him being the huge component in taking down Mahito. Although I will be fair and factor in the fact that Yuji had a huge assist from not only Todo but Nobara too. Overall, Yuji still had a huge positive role in the Battle of Shibuya, one that overexceeded any expectations that could have possibly been placed on someone of his rank and even age. But again, Chozo's loss and Sukuna's appearance holds him back from that MVP title, and when it comes to contribution, I place him 3rd behind Nanami. Which means the most valuable player, or well, the most valuable sorcerer, is none other than the 10 Shadows user, the king of potential, and the coolest character at getting beat up, Megumi Fushiguro. And to be honest, I didn't think this should be as surprising as when it comes to more chaotic situations like Shibuya, someone like Megumi who is a genius thrived. Even when first coming into the event as a grade 2 recommended to become grade 1 under the direction of Takumo Ino and Nanami had told Ino, who was little broing Megumi, that the first year was an excellent student and not to be discounted for his age, and Megumi for sure went above and beyond in that regard. Starting off, Megumi had a major role in defeating cursed Yuzojiro and taking out a veil. And notice how I'm saying a major role and not in a dual fight with Itadori, because Megumi was the one who managed to figure out Jiro's curse technique and inverse and gave Yuji the plan to take him out. This is something Yuji would have taken a whole lot longer to figure out, if not at all, when it comes to the true nature of his curse technique. This is simply something only geniuses at combat like Megumi could have figured out. His IQ in the matter is something I think could only be matched by grade 1s or special grades. From taking out the veil, Megumi further went to show his value and versatility to the sorcerers with his last second rescue of Nanami, Naobito, and Maki from Dagram's domain. Not only did he show up with the domain expansion usage, a feat accomplished by a first year by the way, while every single grade 1 present couldn't do the same, but in the process Megumi saved not 1 but 2 grade 1s and Maki, and also made it possible for Toji, his daddy, well pause, to enter the fray of battle through Megumi's planned exit in what seemed like an impossible situation to survive, and we all got to see what Toji ended up doing to Dagon. With me not getting into manga spoilers, Megumi was the sole reason Dagon met his predator and his eventual end. So far, we have taking out a veil and a curse user, saving Nanami, Naobito, and Maki, while also providing an offense against the disaster curse. And bro is a first year doing this. Malaysia Mei, Naobito, take some notes. And his time in Shibuya is not even close to being over. Because right after engaging in a tense domain clash, he had to deal with family drama and take on Toji one-on-one. Something only he could do when comparing him to the other sorcerers present. Toji is faster than Naobito, stronger than Nanami, and multiple updates above Maki. It was only due to the 10 Shadows' versatility and utility, coupled with Megumi's high battle IQ that allows him to apply Shikigami to any scenario flawlessly, that he was able to survive this encounter with the monster operating on instinct. And if Megumi didn't take on the Toji assignment, Toji, who was going for the strongest around at the time, had no reason not to kill any of the other sorcerers present with ease. Maybe Toji and Jogo match up if he had stayed there, but I highly doubt another special grade matchup akin to Sukuna vs Jogo would have been a positive for the sorcerers, meeting expectations and surviving the impossible. Well, obviously he had plot armor, but still quite the feat. Just for him to top it all off with the controversial summoning of the 10 Shadows Shikigami trump card in Maharaga. Now for a while, a huge chunk of the fandom, including me, often trolled Megumi for bringing Maharaga out against a scrub like Haruta, and how he was always so willing to bring out a hydrogen bomb when facing a crying baby. But in this scenario, Megumi made the right choice. because when you look at the wider context of his decision and what was going on at the time, summoning Mahoraga was all he could do. As while he fought Toji, he had sensed Sukuna had been released somewhere in Shibuya, and now knowing a catastrophic threat was just walking around, and with him low on curse energy and bleeding out, with a small chance of making it to Shoko in time, Megumi summoning Mahoraga was him dead set on not letting his final opportunity to help his allies go to waste, even though that is what the decision may have appeared to be. In summoning Mahoraga, there was no risk for his allies, but either a small or very large reward, because either way he probably wasn't going to make it out of that encounter alive, so summoning Mahoraga would either just result in Haruta, a curse user, dead without being the small reward, or the larger reward in Mahoraga being able to take on Sukuna, which is exactly what he did. In my pick of the fight or at least moment of the year, Sukuna absolutely destroyed everything in sight to take down Mahoraga. And while you could see this as a negative for the sorcerers, in reality, if Sukuna had to go out of his way and was occupied with Mahoraga and saving Megumi, Mahoraga is then in turn occupying him or rather keeping his attention. Because before Sukuna jumped into the exorcism trial, he still had quite some time and energy left in his possession of Yuji's body to wreak havoc. Time and energy spent on Mahoraga and like hundreds of civilians rather than any of the Jujutsu sorcerers that were there. Because I'm sure Sukuna would be interested in killing some of Yuji's friends like a Maki or a Nobara or a Nanami just for the fun of it. But instead his time of possession had run out as soon as he had finished off Mahoraga, who was summoned by Megumi, with there being no sorcerer casualty in the fight. Overall, Megumi took out a veil, saved 2 grade 1s, allowed for the defeat of Dagon, survived/occupy Toji, and then occupied Sukuna, the king of curses. And not one sorcerer died on Megumi's watch. Megumi Fushiguro is mine and hopefully your most valuable sorcerer, with Nanami and Yuji following suit. Moving on to the curses, and I tend to be a bit more straightforward with this MVC race because there was a lot less of them involved. This is simply a race between Jogo and Mahito. So to speedrun, Hanami shouldn't have used their curse technique, broing outside. Chozo was forced into earning his participation credit by Jogo, who threatened to kill him, then beat Yuji, just for him to switch sides, which kinda equaled everything he did for the curses out. Somebody named Haruta simply was never gonna win this award. Dagon failed to kill any sorcerers, probably the most unlucky character out of the entire event, because he ran into the chief exterminator in Toji, and Geto's family probably got killed in Jogo's meteor for all we know. The only curses pulling their weight was the 2 leaders of the operation. Jogo did his best to occupy Jogo long enough for fake Geto to steal him and took out a grade 1 in Naobito, severely injured the other Nanami, but then the fire curse spirits went to lose in the battle of firepower with the king of curses. Now, as I've stated multiple times in the video, Jogo could have done a whole lot more sorcerer killing, but decided to go big or go home in summoning Sukuna. Ito on the other hand saved Jogo, Dagon, and Chozo, who were seconds away from getting murked by Gojo. By bringing a horde of transfigured humans and allowing for chaos to descend, Mahito widened the scope of Jogo's attention and thus his power, which led to the disaster curses being spared with Gojo's domain expansion and allowed for the fake Geto opening. He then went on to take out a grade 1 in Nanami, another young sorcerer Nobara, and while he lost in his death match with Todo and Yuji, it wasn't due to a power difference. Todo's Boogie Woogie was enough to put off almost anyone in the series in a close combat situation. Mahito did soon adapt to it. And he also had to carry damage from multiple black flashes and a resonance from Nobara earlier, and bro still didn't fold until a sneak attack from Yuji at the end. Also, in the process, he evolved more than any other disaster curses had done, and at the end of his life became the strongest curse spirit in Shibuya, while staying true to his will as a curse and fulfilling his true desires no matter the expense to others. If you haven't figured out by now, Mahito was my pick for the MVP on the curses side. He simply transcended expectations, figuratively and literally, and in my opinion was the closest antagonist to ever reaching the heights someone like Sukuna, the king of curses, resides in his own creepy fun way of course. So yeah, Megumi and Mahito were putting up all-time numbers for their respective teams. And with that, we've reached the end of a pretty long video. Did not anticipate it being this long, but also a video I had a lot of fun with, as it allowed me to get into my more creative bag with an already content inspiring series that is JJK. Anyway, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Jujutsu Kaisen content, starting off 2024 with a bang. Turn on post notifications, and most importantly, comment down below both your MVPs and also your least valuable sorcerer or curse too, because some of these characters just didn't deserve any playing time or I guess screen time. But with all that said, respect your GOAT.